Hello and welcome once again to Tim Tom Talks.
And I'm Tom in Los Angeles, California.
And Tom is he's kind of like where I was, but in his version of where I was. Last week I was outside. It was beautiful. Spring had sprung in my part of Australia. Now it's really windy where I am. So Tom's outside and I'm back in the office.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you could see. Can you see the dolphin back there?
Well, I can now.
I didn't show you that earlier. Yes, I'm out with the dolphins and the garden, the flowers, and
So good to see you thriving in your environment, Dr. Tom.
Oh my God, it's amazing. Oh my God, and I'm sitting actually under a grapevine, and the grapes. You should see these bunches of grapes are like this big. And
well, we're gonna have to see you literally like nourishing yourself in your environment next whenever they're right. Whenever they're right.
Just sitting there, and then I'll have my husband wave a fan, and I'll sit there and feed me grapes. How about if we do one like that?
He's gonna love that. Yeah, peeling them first, of course. Okay, back to the topic. Right. Yes. So, what we are talking about today? You ready? We have a very clever effect for you, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking today, about these three topics that we've been talking about: trust, uncertainty, and thriving being well-being. And what we're going to talk about today is really bring them all together and applying them to our wonderful world of work, and in particular, bringing people back into a place of work and what's involved with that. You know, what you need to factor in and how embracing each of these topics can really help that experience and that journey point, you know, be ultra productive and beneficial for everybody.
Yeah.
Doc, do you want to take the lead from here?
In the beginning, whoops, I better hold this. In the beginning, we developed a program called Work Forward. And it's an evergreen program, but it was built because of what's needed today for people going back into the office and having uncertainty about that. And what that means and how do you build that program. And initially, when a client was asking for it, they were talking about the fear of people experiencing of going back into the office and working through another transition and another change. And what's going to happen is people are either going to want this program for that immediate moving back in, or after they're in, they're going to find that teams aren't working. They thought they were going to come back and everything was going to be the same, and it's not. Things are different because the pandemic's still going. They're still going to have sick people out. We still have a lot going on outside of our work environments. Our work environments are still uncertain as to how production is going to happen and how we're going to, if business is going to thrive through this next phase, whichever phase we're in. So there's going to be a lot of changes. So we developed the program as a work forward program where people, what are the essential elements that you need to be grounded at work, grounded with yourselves, your team, your leader, and build resiliency in a positive way that will really help your team thrive for the long term. Do you want to add anything to that?
No. That's it. In a nutshell, that sounds really simple, right? Yeah. That sound good? That sound like something that you'd like in your workplace?
Yeah, I think it's something that's needed anyway. And the way that we built this is we built this on these three principles of nurturing trust. We built this on the three principles of nurturing trust, navigating uncertainty, and developing a thriving well-being. And when we talk about nurturing trust, we know that it takes a long time to build trust, but there are certain actions that are required to build trust. And some of those actions are being, especially in an uncertain environment, it's being empathetic, it's being understanding, it's listening, it's being supportive, and it takes a while to build if your team doesn't have it, but it can be built and be strong. And when we develop these really supportive relationships, that trust won't go away as quickly, because trust can go away very quickly if somebody breaks that trust. But it'll be less likely to be broken if you have a really strong, resilient relationship with your team. Tim, thoughts?
No, absolutely. I think, you know, the whole notion of creating trust and nurturing the conditions within which trust can grow kind of operates at three levels. So that's how we come at it. The first is each individual being trustworthy, right? And then sort of maintaining that and growing that. Then we look at the level of trust within the group, and then we look at how the level of trust affects the whole system. So in this context, the system would be the organization. The groups are various groups, but as a leader and the leader has the most amount of influence over the level of trust in the group and in the broader system. The primary thing for you to focus on as the leader is being trustworthy. And you do that, as Tom has mentioned, being empathetic, being compassionate, you know, with how you communicate, particularly the transparency and consistency of your communication. So these are the things that we would be looking at and working with you, your team, your system, your organization through the Work Forward program.
Correct. And then when we talk about navigating uncertainty, well, we've all been doing it for a very long time. And now it's one of those things that we can develop bad patterns, even if they're new patterns. And how are we navigating uncertainty? Is it in a positive way? Is it in a fearful way? Is it in an anxiety-ridden way? Is it in a frustrated way? Well, the way we've built this is to really build navigating uncertainty through these elements of shared values that are similar to what we build in trust, but what we're building is compassion. We're building empathy. Trustworthiness is part of this, but we're also looking out for the other person. We're trying to create a grounded environment so people know that they can feel certain in where they are emotionally, even if physically, technologically, they're not certain. And if they're not certain with the business. But if you can be certain in your relationships and your strength of your commitment to the organization, you can find a grounding and navigate through uncertainty. Tim, what are your thoughts?
So everything that Dr. Tom has just said, and yeah, there's consistencies there again. So you need to think about, you know, become skillful in practicing empathy, compassion, also forgiveness.
Yes.
You know, like uncertainty, you know, like produces all kinds of emotions and responses and reactions in people that might be inconsistent. They might be inconsistent over time. They might be inconsistent with that person's sort of familiar state of being. And we need to be forgiving in understanding and being empathetic to what they're experiencing. And that might be different. Like everybody experiences uncertainty differently because the level of need for certainty varies between people and between groups. So I would add that.
Yeah, and I touch on, I touch on in the video below or my forgiveness video, if you're not watching it on our site. What I touch on is also questioning what you're forgiving for. There's being forgiving. It's great. That's exactly what we need. But also questioning, what are you forgiving? Because is it a mistake? Is it a simple mistake? Is it somebody really trying something new, and they failed? But for forgiving that should just be hey, we learned something through that process, because when we do that, we can create a more creative and innovative environment. And is that really forgiveness? That's just part of the process. So it's like changing. It's changing our perceptions. Is that really forgiveness? Or if somebody's calling in sick because they're having to take care of family and you feel like you have to forgive them for that, well, is that forgiveness? This is part of understanding and being understanding of the pandemic and everything that's going on. So it's really questioning what you're forgiving as well. What do you think of that, Tim?
No, 100%. And I think one of the things, again, that we reference, we work on explicitly is genuine collaboration. So I think that analogy that Tom's just shared there, yeah, like if there are, things that you're being called to forgive, well, is that not being genuinely collaborative, as well as being empathetic, compassionate, trustworthy, etc.? If you're forgiving that in one person, you must forgive it in another person to be consistent and therefore trustworthy, and so on and so it goes. Shall we move on to just sort of the third point in our triangle, Tom, and talk about thriving well-being?
I think you should start that one. What do we talk about when we're talking about a thriving well-being?
So thriving well-being, again, it applies at these same three levels. So we want a level of thriving well-being for the individual, for the group, and for the system, for the whole organization. And I think what we have to recognize right now is that at each of those levels, there is an elevated amount of stress, right? Organizations are under an immense amount of stress. Markets are being disrupted. Supply lines are being disrupted. Lots of market and operational stress. Groups are under stress. They're having to work from home. They're having to deal with extra stuff in life as well as in work. All the dynamics have shifted. And then individuals themselves, as we've mentioned over and over in these talks, the amount of individual anxiety, uncertainty, emotional experience, all of the maximum stress. So if we just say we need to deal with and deconstruct stress at these three levels, that is really the sort of the foundational approach to move into being able to embrace a more thriving state of well-being at each of those three levels. That's over you.
Yeah. And so this is where what's integral to this part of the program is our stress management program, which is called Deconstructing Stress. And it is a very practical stress management program, because what we do is, in a 13-step process, is show people how to untangle stress and untangle what's work stress, what's individual stress, where's that crossover, what's similar, what can we address, and give you practical ways to deal with each type of stress that you have, and give you a very simple way, a very simple step system to look at it. So by the end, you have an action plan. And when done right, it's really hard to do wrong, because once you write them down, we look at them and we walk you through. For both employees and leaders, we're able to really help you identify how to address the different types of stresses more easily, more in their little box, so that you don't have this big, huge ball. You automatically have things to deal with and not a huge, big ball of stress. You just have a little list to deal with, and maybe a couple big ones, and then your anxiety will reduce significantly.
Yeah. And especially when this is done in a group context, so recognizing the amount of individual stress that exists within the collective, and then obviously seeing where stress is shared, applying shared values and shared meaning to that shared stress to work on it collaboratively with empathy and compassion. You see how all of this stuff starts to knit together, right? It is a system. So yeah, look, but in a nutshell, these are the three things. And if you want to find out more, that's where you can go. So if this makes sense, if this sounds like it's of interest, then you can go check it out. And the link is in the comments also. And have a look. And please tell us what you think of this, and whether or not you think this would be something that you're curious about and you'd like to understand more. These three domains are all very individual in their context, individual to a person, a group, and an organization. So we don't have an off-the-shelf package here. each version of these programs by design must be different on each of those 3 levels as each client is engaging with them. That's the final bit from me. Dr. Tom, any final comments from you, sir?
No final comments. Just, we want everybody to be out there really nurturing their own trust, navigating uncertainty, and developing a thriving well-being. And you deserve it. You deserve that in your life. So let's make it happen.
Awesome. In which case, see you next week.
Bye-bye.